What happened to female pirates after they were captured and stripped and naked? The captured queens of the Caribbean. Hey guys, tonight we begin with a story that's equal parts chaos and disbelief, and you might want to dim the lights, get cozy, and maybe even tuck your feet under a blanket because we are about to float into the strange, sometimes humiliating, and often surprisingly clever lives of female pirates after they were captured. Yes, you heard that right. Not the roaring battles at sea, not the buried treasure maps, but the aftermath, when all the bluster, the cutlasses, and the stolen rum finally hit the cold, damp, judgmental docks of Port Royal in 1720. Picture it. The sun has begun to dip over the harbor, illuminating the wreckage of Calico Jack's sloop. And there are two women standing in chains, dripping wet, their faces streaked with seawater and salt, shoulders bare beneath the heavy irons. Anne Bonny, fiery as ever, and Mary Read, quieter but just as lethal, have been dragged off the ship by Royal Navy sailors who are grinning like it is a festival and not an arrest. And there's nothing subtle about it. The men are crude, the chains are cold, and both women have been stripped down to their shifts. Public humiliation isn't an accident here, it's the point. As the sailors parade them through the streets, locals gather. Some gape, some cheer, some snicker at the audacity of these women who dared to cut throats and steal loot as if gender were irrelevant. And in the center of it all, Anne spits directly into a guard's face. Of course she does. That one gesture earns her 20 lashes later, across bare skin, a punishment meant to shame, but instead it becomes a badge of defiance. Anne wears it like medals, a silent story stitched into her flesh that reads, "You will never break me." Mary Read, meanwhile, plays a different game. She's secretly pregnant, though the world doesn't know it yet. Her morning sickness is a weapon. She retches dramatically in front of jailers, whispers about a plague, and terrifies everyone enough to loosen the shackles around her wrists and ankles. Ingenious, really, turning what would normally be a curse into a shield. And it works. Guards recoil, fearing contagion, and for a moment, she gains the smallest fraction of freedom in a rat-infested dungeon that smells like despair, sweat, and unwashed linens. The fort where they are held is no better than a medieval oubliette. Rats scurry across the floors, the stone walls seep moisture, and the air is thick with the mingled scents of men, mildew, and salt. The governor, a man of curious cruelty and little imagination, orders daily inspections. Not to see if they are plotting a rebellion, mind you, but to make sure these notorious women aren't hiding weapons where they might do further damage. Yes, between their legs. The invasive nature of this surveillance is staggering, but it was the law, or at least the law as interpreted by men who had never seen a woman do anything other than sew or faint at the sight of blood. Anne, of course, doesn't play along. While the guards assume compliance, she plans. She smuggles a nail file, a tiny, almost comical implement against the vastness of iron bars and chains, and she whispers to herself about escape routes, timing, and the best moments to strike when the guards are distracted. There's a quiet genius to it, a subtle defiance that transforms humiliation into strategy. Anne is alive in the moment, alert, calculating. Every lash she endured sharpening her resolve instead of dulling it. Mary, meanwhile, whispers to a sympathetic midwife who comes into the dungeon under pretense of routine care. The midwife, bribed with small bottles of rum and the promise of secrecy, helps Mary induce early labor. This isn't heroics, it's survival. The guard, oblivious to the plan, is more concerned with whether Mary is smuggling daggers in her hair or hidden coins in her shift. And when the day comes to bring Mary to the gallows, she shouts, belly swollen and defiant, "I'm quick with child." The crowd gasps. The noose stays empty. Pregnant women weren't executed in some colonies, and she exploits that law like a master strategist, turning biology into a shield no sword can pierce. Anne, by contrast, doesn't get such a reprieve. Denied any mercy, she climbs the scaffold with the same arrogance she showed in life, the same reckless fire that marked every daring raid. She laughs in the faces of those who would punish her, defiant even in the shadow of the noose. "If I'd been a man," she declares, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you'd call me Admiral." That one line encapsulates the absurdity, the audacity, and the brilliance of women who navigated a world designed to break them but found loopholes, irony, and humor even in chains. And then, just like that, history begins to blur. Anne Bonny vanishes from records rumored to have bribed her way to Virginia, perhaps running a brothel under a new name, a woman who could once slit a man's throat with one hand and count coins with the other. Mary Read, by some accounts, dies in childbirth, her infant raised by nuns who never suspect that their ward and's mother once held a cutlass with deadly precision. Both become legends, their wanted posters hanging in taverns, faces scratched out, their stories told and retold with embellishment, fear, and admiration. It's fascinating, really, to consider the layers of irony in all this. These women, public enemies number one, masters of violence and cunning, stripped to their shifts, treated like curiosities, imprisoned like children, yet somehow bending circumstance, law, and human perception to survive. The same society that hated them also depended on their stories for entertainment, gossip, and a touch of scandal. And so, the narrative of female pirates becomes part legend, part cautionary tale, part celebration of audacity in a world ruled by men who assumed compliance was inevitable. Even beyond Port Royal, the phenomenon repeats. Female pirates captured elsewhere were paraded, imprisoned, and scrutinized in ways that male counterparts rarely were. Their bodies became symbols, tools for shaming, warnings to other women who might consider stepping off the societal script. Yet, within these humiliations, cleverness emerged. Subterfuge, feigned illness, secret alliances with sympathetic jailers, and cunning manipulation of legal loopholes became the true weapons, sometimes more effective than pistols, sabers, or boarding axes. And so we drift through history, seeing these women as paradoxes, victims of societal cruelty, but also masters of survival. Stripped of clothing, yet not of agency. Humiliated, yet retaining control. Imprisoned, yet still influencing the world outside their dungeons in ways no jailer could ever predict. They are quiet rebels, shadows of audacity, whispers of defiance floating through Caribbean forts, prison cells, and eventually through the mists of legend. Survival, schemes, and shadows. So after the initial spectacle of capture, the story of Bonny and Mary Read moves into the quieter, slower, yet infinitely more fascinating part. Survival inside walls that smell of damp stone, human sweat, and fear. Imagine a fort that was never meant to house women who had proven themselves capable of cutting throats, stealing ships, and outsmarting men half their size. It's claustrophobic, dimly lit by flickering torches, and the rats have clearly claimed first dibs on the corners. The dungeon becomes their theater, and the prisoners themselves, unwilling actors in a play entirely dictated by circumstance. Anne doesn't waste a second sulking. She measures the distances between bars, notes the weaknesses in the ironwork, observes the guards' routines, and silently mocks them. Every clank of chains, every footstep, every coarse laugh of the jailer becomes part of her mental map of escape. She's constantly aware, a predator in a cage, calculating, patient, waiting for the tiniest oversight. There's a rhythm to her days. Forced inspections, meager meals, the endless stare of the governor's guards. Yet even here, she finds agency. A nail file smuggled cleverly inside her hair ribbon becomes her sword in miniature, a tool to slowly loosen her shackles or scratch messages in the stone walls. Mary, on the other hand, uses her pregnancy as camouflage, a living shield in the eyes of men too stupid or superstitious to realize she's still a pirate at heart. Her morning sickness becomes an elaborate performance. Vomiting dramatically, she convinces the jailers she carries plague within her womb, inspiring both fear and disgust. She feigns faintness, begs for water, and manipulates routines with precision. The guards, eager to avoid contagion, slacken the chains and the inspections just enough to give her small freedoms. Tiny victories in a vast, oppressive prison. Communication between the two women, despite the close quarters, becomes a subtle dance of gestures, whispers, and coded language. They speak of the outside world in fragments, dreams of escape, smuggled objects, rumors of allies in the city, and plans that, if discovered, would have cost them everything. Anne cracks jokes to keep Mary's spirits up, dry, sardonic humor, because despair is contagious and laughter is a quiet rebellion. Mary responds with sly, pointed remarks about their captors, exposing their incompetence and turning the prisoner's world upside down from within. The governor's daily inspections, which were meant to humiliate and assert control, become the stage for these small acts of subversion. Anne endures the lashes without visible complaint, counting each swing of the whip as a reminder of her resilience. Each scar is a story, an emblem of stubbornness, a symbol that she cannot be tamed by mere iron and flesh. Mary, meanwhile, exploits the legal and medical blind spots of the time. Pregnant women, even notorious pirates, could not be executed, at least not without scandal. She leverages this loophole masterfully, creating delays, sowing confusion, and frightening the jailers into cautious respect. Outside, the world is not standing still. Rumors of Anne and Mary's exploits circulate through the Caribbean like wildfire. Tavern whispers, letters, and wanted posters keep their names alive, scratched and defaced in equal measure. Anne's defiance inspires fear and grudging admiration. Mary's clever use of pregnancy and manipulation of the guards elevates her from criminal to legend. Every whispered conversation about them enhances the myth, even as the reality is far more intimate, quiet, and painfully human. Yet, even in the monotony of prison life, their personalities shine. Anne's impatience with authority, her quick temper, and her refusal to bow to male power contrast sharply with Mary's measured, strategic approach. Where Anne acts, Mary calculates. Where Mary hides, Anne confronts. Together, they balance each other in a tense but unspoken alliance, each learning from the other's strengths, each covering the other's weaknesses. Their survival strategies extend beyond immediate threats. Anne plots escape routes with meticulous care, timing potential opportunities to coincide with guard negligence or city celebrations that draw attention elsewhere. Mary manipulates relationships with the few sympathetic guards and midwives, providing small bribes, favors, and threats, always maintaining plausible deniability. It's a game of patience, wit, and nerve, a quiet war fought not on the open seas, but in the cramped shadows of stone walls. And then there's the psychological toll. Being stripped, chained, and scrutinized daily by men who are convinced of their inferiority leaves scars beyond the physical. Anne reacts with outward defiance, laughter, insults, spitting. But there are moments of solitude when the weight of isolation and humiliation presses down. Mary, quieter, internalizes much of the stress, turning it into focus and cunning. Together, they navigate the invisible tightrope of resilience, each day a testament to human adaptability under extreme circumstances. Even the mundane routines of the dungeon, meals, inspection, sleep, and watch rotations, become opportunities. Anne sharpens a nail file while pretending to comb her hair. Mary scribbles coded messages in the margins of any scrap she can find. Every day is a balance of endurance, mischief, and silent rebellion, and over time, their captors learn, often too late, that these women are more dangerous unshackled by circumstance than they ever were on the high seas. Rumors of planned escapes circulate, some wild, some plausible. Anne considers bribing a guard, timing her breakout with the chaos of a city celebration, or simply overpowering the wronged and distracted jailers at night. Mary evaluates the risk of childbirth, potential allies, and the physical limits of her body, realizing that her survival is a strategic game that requires every ounce of wit and cunning. In these confined spaces, stripped of freedom yet never of will, Anne and Mary transform their punishments into instruments of control. They manipulate perception, exploit legal loopholes, and turn even the most demeaning aspects of incarceration into tools of power. The paradox is striking. The very system designed to break them instead becomes a proving ground. A quiet theater where ingenuity, resilience, and audacity are on full display, even if the audience is limited to a handful of guards and the rats that share their cells. The dance between defiance and survival. Now let's drift a little deeper into the rhythms of their confined lives, because if you think prison is just about walls, chains, and bad meals, you've clearly never been inside a Caribbean fort with two of the deadliest women on the seas. The days blend into each other. The same stone walls, the same rats that seem to watch their every move, the same guards trudging in and out like clockwork. But for Anne, Bonny, and Mary Read, monotony becomes a tool as sharp as any cutlass. Anne's spirit, fiery as ever, finds ways to occupy her mind. She studies the guards' routines like a chess master examining an opponent. Who carries the keys? Who is careless with the irons? Who has a soft spot for a bribe? Every answer is a move closer to freedom. She sharpens her nail file in secret, hiding it beneath her shift, and practices subtle maneuvers that could loosen chains or, if necessary, cause a distraction. Her defiance is visible. A spit here, a joke there, but it masks the meticulous plotting beneath. Mary, quietly brilliant, turns her pregnancy into both shield and weapon. Morning sickness is no longer just discomfort, it's a calculated performance. Vomiting, fainting, pleading, and whispering of invisible plagues. All of it terrifies the guards enough to give her small liberties. She even whispers to the midwives, those rare sympathetic souls who slip her sips of rum, medicines, or contraband that might make labor more manageable. Every interaction is an opportunity, a chance to manipulate the system without ever directly confronting it. The two women communicate in a subtle coded language, often with nothing more than a glance or a shift of position. Their conversations about escape, survival, and strategy are hidden in plain sight, whispered just above a normal tone or masked by feigned complaints about hunger, rats, or cold stone. Anne jokes, sarcastic and dry, about their predicament. "Well, at least the rats haven't started paying rent yet," she murmurs one night, earning a barely audible chuckle from Mary, who keeps her own wits sharp. Humor becomes both solace and shield, a tiny rebellion against the monotony of incarceration. Their captors, predictably, underestimate them. The governor orders inspections, confident that the women's bodies and spirits will reveal nothing but fear. Daily, Anne and Mary endure these examinations, meant to humiliate, asserting control where there is none. Anne endures lashes across bare skin without a flicker of submission. Each mark becomes a story, a statement of resistance. Mary uses the law, her unborn child, to exploit loopholes, ensuring the guards proceed cautiously, if at all. Outside, the city hums with rumors of their exploits. Taverns buzz with tales of the women who dared more than any man, with wanted posters defaced, scratched, and reused as proof that legend can outlive flesh. Anne's brazen defiance inspires both fear and awe, while Mary's cleverness, turning pregnancy into protection, elevates her to near-mythical status. The myth grows faster than the truth, but that is the way of history. It prefers stories with flair and irony over mere facts. Even mundane aspects of prison life become arenas for ingenuity. Meals provide opportunities to smuggle small objects. Cleaning routines allow for whispered messages or unobserved notes to allies outside. Nighttime, long and silent, is the canvas upon which plans are sketched, schedules memorized, weaknesses mapped. Every small victory, every slight advantage, is celebrated in whispered jokes and shared smiles. In a place designed to strip them of power, Anne and Mary create pockets of sovereignty, rules that only they understand. Anne and Mary also begin to understand the psychological dimensions of survival. Humiliation, designed to break them, becomes a tool they can manipulate. Anne laughs at the guards' crude jokes, turning the very weapon of shame into a mark of audacity. Mary feigns weakness, forcing the jailers to treat her with unnecessary care or to underestimate her. Each act of manipulation requires subtlety, timing, and awareness, skills as vital as any learned on a ship deck or in a fight. And then there's the interplay between their personalities, which is both protective and instructive. Anne's brash courage contrasts with Mary's quiet cunning. Anne pushes forward, daring the guards to notice or react, while Mary pulls back, observing, calculating, ensuring that no misstep costs them both. Together, they form a strange, unspoken alliance, one bold and visible, the other subtle and hidden. Each compensates for the other, creating a balance of audacity and strategy that keeps them one step ahead of captivity. The daily inspections, meant to break them, become a stage for their private victories. Anne endures each lash or frisk with silent defiance, while Mary employs distraction and manipulation to maintain the fragile freedom she carves from a hostile environment. In a world where every moment is observed, every gesture weighed, Their ingenuity thrives precisely because the guards assume submission. The irony is delicious. Those who seek to control them inadvertently sharpen their skills, hone their resolve, and teach them patience, timing, and the art of subtle rebellion. And so, life in the dungeon continues. Days of humiliation, monotony, and observation become exercises in resilience. Anne sharpens, plans, defies. Mary calculates, manipulates, and feigns weakness. The governor believes he is in control. The guards think they dictate the terms, but the women, even in chains and stripped to the minimal, redefine power in ways invisible to those who insist it exists only in swords, keys, and walls. By the time news of their eventual fates begins to circulate, whispered, exaggerated, and distorted, Anne and Mary have already achieved a subtle victory. Their captors may hold their bodies, but the women's minds remain free. Every joke, every plan, every clever manipulation has been a small act of rebellion, a way to assert autonomy in a world designed to deny them even that. The scaffold and the law's odd mercy now. Let S drift toward the day that history remembers most vividly. The day when Anne, Bonny, and Mary Read were meant to meet the law in its most literal form. The scaffold. It's important to pause here and consider the odd, almost theatrical way justice operated in Port Royal. Laws existed, certainly, but their application was inconsistent, often illogical, and frequently cruelly ironic. And in the case of these two women, it revealed a peculiar mixture of fear, superstition, and grudging respect. The day dawns gray and humid. Port Royal's cobblestones glisten with early morning rain, and the harbor's smell of salt, fish, and oil hangs heavy in the air. Crowds gather, not quite knowing whether to cheer, mock, or faint. They are here to witness history, or at least the punishment of history's most notorious female pirates. Anne and Mary, shackled and bound, are led from the dungeon. Guards grunt, chains clank, and the women, despite every reason to feel fear, carry themselves with a strange grace, heads high, eyes sharp. Mary's secret is still intact. Her pregnancy. A swell beneath her shift, hidden from casual observation, but known to the more careful guards, becomes her lifeline. When confronted with the reality of her condition, the law, perhaps reluctantly, perhaps superstitiously, refuses to hang her. There is a strange mercy in that moment, a legal loophole that she exploits with precision. She announces her condition with a quiet but clear defiance. I'm quick with child. And the crowd reacts with shock, curiosity, and whispered debate. The noose, which seems inevitable, is left empty. She has survived not through violence, not through flight, but through the clever use of circumstance, law, and human oversight. Anne, however, does not share this reprieve. Her body stripped of defenses, her reputation preceding her. She climbs the scaffold with the same arrogance that defined her life at sea. Chains clink, wood creaks, the crowd murmurs. Anne laughs. Of course she laughs. She mocks the absurdity, the double standards, and the incompetence surrounding her. If I'd been a man, she declares, loud enough for even the most distracted observer to hear, you'd call me Admiral. And with that, she reminds everyone that audacity knows no gender, and courage is often mistaken for madness by those too timid to act. It's worth noting that scaffolds, public executions, and all the trappings of punishment were as much about theater as law. For men, execution was a spectacle of order, a demonstration of state power. For Anne and Mary, it was theater of irony. One spared due to law, one facing punishment with defiance, both transforming the spectacle into a commentary on gender, justice, and perception. Every clank of chains, every gasp from the crowd, every whispered rumor afterward reinforced the legend rather than diminished it. The aftermath is quieter but no less fascinating. Anne disappears from record soon after. Those stories suggest she bribed her way to Virginia and began a new life, perhaps running a brothel, perhaps simply vanishing into anonymity. Mary's fate, entwined with the harsh realities of childbirth, remains more tragic. She dies in labor, leaving a child to be raised by nuns who never knew the mother once commanded fear and respect across the Caribbean seas. These endings, though divergent, share a common thread: survival, adaptation, and the persistent power of cleverness and audacity in a world that sought to strip them of both. Even the mundane details of their imprisonment, the chains, the inspections, the whispers, and the stolen moments of rebellion contributed to their enduring legend. Anne's scars, Mary's clever ruses, and their unwavering defiance became stories that tavern-goers would repeat for decades. Posters of their faces were circulated and defaced, images scratched out, legends elaborated, yet the essence remained intact. The world outside, obsessed with morality, legality, and spectacle, had unknowingly crafted immortality for two women who dared to live differently. And it's fascinating, isn't it, to reflect on the irony. Two women, stripped naked, chained, and humiliated, emerge from history not solely as victims, but as clever manipulators of circumstance. Their punishment, meant to break, instead amplified their cleverness. Their suffering, designed to shame, instead inspired whispers of admiration and fear. Every lash, every inspection, every whispered warning to a guard became part of a tapestry in which resilience and audacity were as essential as cutlasses or cunning. Even today, the image of Anne and Mary walking from the dungeon, defiant, clever, and dangerous, survives in folklore, legend, and scholarly accounts. Their stories remind us that history does not always favor the strong or the obedient. Sometimes it favors those who can navigate humiliation, exploit legal loopholes, and wield audacity as deftly as any weapon. They were pirates, certainly, but also architects of survival, performers in a cruel theater, and symbols of resistance in a world structured to deny them agency. As we drift away from the scaffold, imagine the city of Port Royal in those moments. The rain glistening, the crowd murmuring, the guards confused, and two women each in her own way, rewriting the rules of captivity, the law, and legend itself. And while Mary's clever deception shields her from immediate death, Anne's defiance etches her presence into the minds of all who witness it. Together they transform punishment into a narrative of audacity, intelligence, and courage that resonates far beyond the walls of the dungeon or the scaffold. Legends, rumors, and disappearing acts. Now let's float out of Port Royal's damp fort and wander into the murky world of rumors, whispered stories, and the ways history remembers or forgets these remarkable women. Because after their capture, imprisonment, and the events of the scaffold, Bonny and Mary Read didn't just vanish from society, they vanished from the official record, leaving only fragments of fact and a tidal wave of legend. And as anyone who has studied pirate history knows, legends tend to exaggerate, embellish, and occasionally rewrite reality entirely. Anne Bonny's disappearance is particularly fascinating. Some accounts claim she bribed her way out of jail, using gold, charm, or possibly a mixture of both to secure a new identity in Virginia. Perhaps she became the proprietress of a brothel, or perhaps she simply melted into anonymity, choosing to live out her days quietly after years of chaos and rebellion. It's worth imagining her in that scenario, stripped of chains but not of audacity, trading a cutlass for cunning, navigating a new society where the laws are less clear than those of the high seas, but the stakes are just as high. She remains as much a mystery as a legend, an open-ended story that invites speculation. Mary Read, in contrast, is more tragically tethered to the realities of her situation. Pregnant at the time of her capture, she used her condition to manipulate her captors, delay her execution, and secure a small measure of safety. Yet childbirth, unpredictable and dangerous in the 18th century, claims her life, leaving an infant behind. This child, raised by nuns unaware of their mother's murderous exploits or cunning survival tactics, becomes a quiet, indirect testament to Mary's resourcefulness. Even in death, Mary's story is layered with irony. She evaded the gallows only to succumb to a natural, if cruel, fate. The legends surrounding both women only grow in the retelling. Tavern-goers and storytellers embellish, adding details that may or may not be true. Anne dueling a jealous lover, Mary navigating midwives with deadly cunning, both plotting escape while guards slept. Wanted posters survive, faces scratched out, stories warped. Each retelling emphasizes bravery, audacity, and defiance, sometimes even more than fact allows. And yet, despite exaggeration, the essence remains. These were women who defied expectations, laws, and society itself. One striking detail is the psychological resilience they displayed. Being stripped naked in public, chained, and examined daily by men eager to assert dominance could have crushed almost anyone. Yet Anne and Mary leveraged humiliation as a tool. Anne's laughter, spitting, and general insolence transformed punishment into performance art. Mary's illness, her manipulation of pregnancy, and her cunning in securing favors converted surveillance into advantage. Their survival was both literal and symbolic, a demonstration of intelligence, adaptability, and relentless determination in an environment engineered to erase agency. Even minor acts in prison carried weight. A hidden nail file, a whispered conversation, or a stolen sip of rum could shift the balance of power. Anne's tactile, almost martial approach to manipulation contrasted with Mary's strategic, patient, and deeply psychological methods. Observers might have seen only two desperate prisoners, but what was really happening was a chess match conducted with nerves, intuition, and subtlety. And perhaps that's the real lesson. Resilience often wears a quiet, unglamorous face, but it can still overturn the intentions of those who believe themselves in control. Beyond the personal and psychological, there is a social layer. Port Royal itself, a city of commerce, vice, and rumor, became a stage on which gender, law, and reputation were performed daily. Female pirates challenged every expectation, not just by their crimes, but by their audacity in captivity. By surviving, manipulating, and sometimes escaping, they exposed inconsistencies in law enforcement, cultural assumptions, and societal norms. The fact that a woman's cleverness could outwit imprisonment, scrutiny, and execution is a story that resonates precisely because it was, and remains, so unexpected. And let's not forget the small, almost comical ironies. Mary's pregnancy, for instance, the source of so much leverage, also drew unwanted attention, gossip, and concern from guards who simultaneously feared and misunderstood her. Anne, meanwhile, endured lashings meant to mark her for humiliation, but each cut reinforced her legend, adding tangible proof of resistance to a world that assumed women could not embody fearlessness. Every scar, every whispered story, every scratched poster in a tavern adds another layer to the mythos. These women's post-capture lives, filled with cunning, humor, and relentless strategy, remind us that history is rarely a simple chain of events. It is layered, ironic, and full of contradictions. Bonny and Mary Read were simultaneously criminals and survivors, spectacles and strategists, victims of circumstance and masters of it. Even as the law sought to reduce them to examples of moral failure, they turned every restriction, every insult, every act of supposed domination into a lesson in human ingenuity. Subtle rebellions and small victories. Let's drift now into the quieter, almost invisible acts of rebellion that defined Bonny and Mary Read's captivity. Because while the scaffold and the dungeon's public humiliation are memorable, it's the smaller, subtler maneuvers that reveal the full depth of their cleverness. And by subtle, I mean acts that would have been nearly imperceptible to anyone who wasn't paying careful attention. But for these two women, small victories mattered more than grand gestures. Bonny, never one to stay idle, uses every moment to observe her surroundings. She studies guards' habits, the creaking hinges of the fort doors, the rhythm of their patrols. Every clink of chain, every grunt, every casual glance from a bored jailer becomes part of her internal map. She hides her nail file meticulously, sometimes under her hair, sometimes in folds of her shift, and practices minute manipulations with it when no one is watching. Even a single loosened link in her shackle feels like a triumph, a tiny, almost invisible step toward freedom. Mary Read, meanwhile, is quietly weaponizing her condition. Morning sickness, sleepless nights, feigned weakness, all of it becomes a game of psychological chess. She ensures guards maintain caution, unwittingly giving her small freedoms. She cultivates subtle alliances, speaking in hushed tones to midwives, delivering favors in exchange for rum or medicinal herbs that ease her discomfort. Each interaction is carefully calculated, reinforcing the notion that even in captivity, agency can be asserted through intellect and cunning. Their humor, dry and understated, serves a similar purpose. Anne cracks sardonic jokes under her breath, laughing at the absurdity of the guards' attempts to dominate her, while Mary offers sly quips or observations that expose the incompetence of those around them. It's humor as defense, morale, and psychological warfare rolled into one. It's also a subtle rebellion, a reminder that even in chains, their minds are free, untethered by the rules and expectations imposed upon them. The interplay between their personalities is fascinating. Anne thrives on bold defiance, striking quickly, speaking sharply, and daring others to react. Mary operates differently, emphasizing patience, observation, and timing. Anne challenges the system with action. Mary manipulates it with perception. Together they create a balance that is both protective and instructive. Anne's audacity masks Mary's strategic brilliance, while Mary's patience tempers Anne's impulsiveness. It's an unspoken partnership built on mutual respect, survival instincts, and shared history on the high seas. Even daily routines, the seemingly mundane tasks of prison life, become opportunities. Meals are examined for hidden objects. Cleaning routines allow whispered messages or coded signals. Nighttime offers moments for secret communication and planning. Anne's nail file, Mary's small bribes, whispered words, and careful observation are all weapons in this constrained arena. What seems insignificant to an inattentive guard is actually a carefully orchestrated campaign of survival and quiet resistance. And then there's the psychological dimension. Humiliation, intended to break them, becomes a tool to manipulate perception. Anne endures lashes and inspections with laughter and defiance, subverting the intended effect. Mary, feigning illness or weakness, coerces cautious treatment and delayed punishment. They convert cruelty into opportunity, discomfort into strategy. Their survival is as much about mental resilience as physical cunning, demonstrating a depth of intelligence often underestimated in historical accounts. The city outside Port Royal continues to gossip, embellish, and mythologize. Anne's defiance, Mary's cleverness, and their combined ingenuity ensure that even in chains, they dominate the narrative. Taverns buzz with exaggerated tales. Wanted posters are scratched, defaced, repurposed. Legends grow faster than the truth. And while officials might view them as mere criminals, history remembers them differently, as women who navigated the impossible with wit, audacity, and unflinching courage. The paradox is stark. They are both prisoners and masters. Their bodies may be constrained, but their minds are unconstrained. Every act of small rebellion, every whispered plan, every manipulated guard interaction shifts the balance in their favor. Their story isn't only about piracy or law. It's about the subtle, almost imperceptible ways that intelligence and resilience can triumph in circumstances designed to destroy them. Anne and Mary are also remarkably aware of the theater around them. Public spectacle, guards' assumptions, and social expectations all become parts of the game. They leverage fear, gender norms, and superstition, turning the audience, both officials and citizens, into unwitting allies, or at the very least, tools to manipulate. What looks like submission is often cunning in disguise. What looks like weakness often conceals planning. In essence, every small victory is a quiet reassertion of power, a demonstration that even in extreme restriction, agency can survive. Rumors, escape plots, and the power of perception. Now let's float a little farther into the world of whispers, rumors, and the almost invisible maneuvers Bonny and Mary Read used to bend circumstance to their will. Because even in captivity, even stripped down to shifts and chained, their influence spread beyond the damp walls of the fort. Their story, like the Caribbean tides, rippled outward, touching guards, townsfolk, and eventually history itself. Bonny, ever impatient with restraint, spends her days mapping escape routes in minute detail. She notices gaps in guard rotations, weak points in locks, and the subtle distractions that human error always creates. Each minor oversight becomes an opportunity. A guard's casual stretch, a midwife's brief glance, a loose board on the floor, all become parts of a larger puzzle that Anne pieces together with care. She jokes quietly to Mary about her architectural critiques of the dungeon, making light of an environment designed to crush spirits. Humor softens the monotony, but also sharpens awareness. Mary Read, quiet and observant, turns perception into power. She cultivates sympathy, plants seeds of fear, and manipulates expectations. Guards believe they understand her vulnerability, her compliance, even her fear. But she is always calculating, always one step ahead. Morning sickness, faked fainting spells, whispered warnings of plague. These are not simple acts of survival. They are tactical tools. Each guard who relaxes, each jailer who underestimates her, extends the invisible space she controls within the fortress. Communication between Anne and Mary continues to be subtle but vital. A glance, a shift of posture, a seemingly idle joke carries meaning. Anne plans, Mary calculates, and together they form a dynamic, almost symbiotic. Anne's audacity challenges guards directly, keeping attention focused outward, while Mary's strategy works in shadows, bending the rules and exploiting gaps. Their combined approach makes them unexpectedly difficult to contain, and even the most vigilant jailers begin to notice that these are not ordinary prisoners. Outside, rumors thrive. Taverns buzz with tales of the women's cunning, exaggerating escapes that never happened, feats that were half true, and confrontations with authority that blend fact with legend. Anne and Mary's names circulate in gossip and official dispatches alike, distorted but undeniably potent. The public image of two defiant women, one fiery and confrontational, the other calculating and patient, becomes larger than life, ensuring that their reputations survive even as official records grow thin. Small victories accumulate in the dungeon. Anne sharpens her nail file under the pretense of grooming. Mary sneaks minor contraband from sympathetic midwives. The smallest acts of defiance, imperceptible to inattentive guards, become tangible measures of control. Each day of survival is itself an achievement. Each act of minor manipulation a step toward maintaining agency in a world designed to strip it away. The interplay of courage and cunning reaches its peak in the psychological space of perception. Anne's laughter at the absurdity of her captors, her fearless gaze, and her visible disdain communicate power even when physically restrained. Mary's manipulations of fear, sympathy, and superstition convince those around her that she is fragile and compliant, when in reality she is quietly dictating terms. Both women turn humiliation into leverage, demonstrating that power often resides not in brute force, but in the subtle control of perception. Then there are the small plots that never reach fruition, quietly scuttled or delayed by circumstance. Anne considers bribing guards, exploiting festivals, or slipping away during chaotic moments in the city. Mary weighs the risk of childbirth against the chance for escape, always aware of her physical limitations and the ethical ambiguity of using pregnancy as a shield. These plans, whether executed or not, show their resourcefulness, adaptability, and relentless refusal to be passive victims. The prison itself, designed to break spirit and impose absolute authority, inadvertently becomes a training ground. Every inspection, every guard interaction, every forced meal or chain tightening becomes part of a subtle curriculum in strategy, patience, and psychology. Anne hones her audacity. Mary hones her perception. Together they transform captivity into an arena in which intellect and resilience dominate brute authority. And so, in this confined, damp, and dangerous environment, Anne, Bonny, and Mary Read quietly defy expectation. Each day, each manipulation, each subtle victory reinforces the paradox of their story. Physically restrained, yet intellectually free, humiliated yet assertive, prisoners who have found ways to wield power invisible to those around them. History remembers them as pirates, but their time in captivity reveals a different kind of mastery. Mastery over circumstance, perception, and survival itself. Schemes, scandals, and the echo of legends. Let's now float into the slower, almost imperceptible currents of intrigue surrounding Anne, Bonny, and Mary Read in their final days of captivity. Because while the scaffold and public punishments are the parts most often recounted, it's the quieter moments, whispers, clandestine favors, small acts of rebellion, that truly define the enduring legend of these women. Anne, restless as ever, begins to refine her escape strategies. Her observations of the fort, its guards, and routines are meticulous, She notices subtle lapses: a guard distracted by gossip, a door poorly latched, a shipment arriving late in the night. These small imperfections form the backbone of her imaginary escape plans, sketches in her mind that keep her occupied and focused. She practices subtle manipulations with her nail file, using it not just for survival, but as a talisman of resistance, a reminder that even in chains, control can be exerted in tiny, precise ways. Mary, more patient and cerebral, leans into perception and psychological leverage. Her pregnancy, a constant presence, becomes an intricate tool. Feigned illness, whispered warnings of infection, fainting, and pleas for gentleness manipulate the guards into granting her small freedoms. She also cultivates relationships with midwives and sympathetic jailers, exchanging small favors or information for assistance. Every interaction is calculated, measured, and strategic, an art of survival that relies not on force, but on subtle mastery of circumstance. Their communication, coded and understated, becomes ever more vital. A glance, a shift in stance, a whisper masked as a complaint can communicate a plan, a warning, or an encouragement. Anne pushes, Mary calculates. Anne confronts, Mary manipulates. Together they form a dual strategy that makes them unpredictable, uncontainable, even to those who believe they hold absolute authority. Meanwhile, rumors continue to circulate beyond the fort walls. Tales of their exploits, exaggerated and embroidered, swirl through Port Royal. Anne and Mary's audacity becomes folklore, each retelling amplifying courage, cunning, and defiance. Tavern goers, sailors, and merchants share tales that may have never happened, but the spirit of truth remains intact. Two women, clever, fearless, and resilient, who manage to unsettle a city, a legal system, and the imaginations of countless observers. Every small victory in captivity matters. Anne loosens chains slightly, Mary secures a small gift or favor, and the psychological balance shifts subtly in their favor. These acts are invisible to inattentive guards, but crucial to maintaining morale and agency. Even mundane routines, meals, inspections, cleaning, become tools in a quiet game of influence and survival. In a space designed for domination, they quietly assert autonomy. The women also navigate the social theater of the prison. Guards, midwives, and officials operate according to assumptions of gender, class, and expected behavior. Anne exploits boldness. Mary exploits perception. Humiliation, intended to control, becomes a tool they can manipulate. Anne's laughter, spitting, and sardonic commentary convert public shame into private power. Mary's feigned vulnerability manipulates fear and sympathy to her advantage. Together, their combined strategy ensures they are never fully contained, never fully understood. Then, there are the small, aborted plans, bribes that never materialize, opportunistic escapes delayed by circumstance, contingencies disrupted by unexpected visitors. These unrealized plots illustrate their creativity, adaptability, and relentless pursuit of freedom. Even failure becomes instructive, teaching patience, timing, and the limits of influence. Every minor setback is integrated into a broader understanding of power and survival within a restrictive environment. And while their bodies remain bound, their minds roam freely, exploring possibilities, testing assumptions, and quietly manipulating reality. Each day of survival is itself a triumph, a demonstration that intellect and audacity often outweigh physical control. History often focuses on execution or battle, but here, in the quiet, small acts of defiance and cunning, the women's true mastery shines. Anne Bonny and Mary Read's legacy, though tangled in myth and rumor, reflects a subtle truth. The most remarkable acts are not always the loudest or most visible. Laughter, perception, patience, and small victories. These are the weapons of the clever, the audacious, and the resilient. And in a world intent on reducing them to spectacles, they redefine the rules, reminding us that survival, ingenuity, and defiance can persist even in the harshest circumstances. Secrets, survival, and the weight of legacy. Now, let's drift further into the private, almost invisible realm of Anne Bonny and Mary Read's final days in captivity, the world behind the chains and stone walls that few ever witnessed. Because it's here, in these quiet moments, that the full measure of their ingenuity, audacity, and survival instinct is revealed. And unlike the scaffold or public spectacle, these acts are invisible to the casual observer, yet they carry as much weight as any duel or naval engagement. Anne, impatient, restless, constantly surveys her surroundings. Every guard rotation, every shift in routine, every minor distraction is noted, catalogued, and mentally rehearsed. She sharpens her nail file, covertly loosening shackles and testing weaknesses in the cell, turning boredom and frustration into preparation. For her, survival is a mix of audacity, timing, and patience. Every glance, every whispered observation, every subtle movement is an investment in eventual freedom, or at the very least, autonomy within captivity. Mary, ever strategic, exploits the subtle power dynamics around her. Her pregnancy, feigned illness, and careful manipulation of perception ensure small liberties from the guards. She negotiates favors with midwives, exchanges whispered messages with sympathetic jailers, and subtly manipulates assumptions of fragility to her advantage. Every day becomes a careful dance between control and subterfuge, a reminder that power often resides in subtlety rather than brute strength. Their communication, mostly silent, becomes essential. A raised eyebrow, a shift in posture, or a seemingly casual remark carries meaning. Anne's directness balances Mary's subtlety. Mary's patience tempers Anne's impulsivity. Together they navigate the dangerous game of perception, ensuring that even in chains, their agency remains intact. Every conversation, joke, or whispered plan is a thread in a network of quiet resistance, invisible to those who underestimate them. Rumors of their exploits spread far beyond the fort walls. Tavern-goers embellish every detail. Sailors retell encounters with the fearsome women who bested men and evaded justice. Wanted posters, defaced and reissued, keep their faces in public consciousness, scratched out but never forgotten. The narrative of audacity, cleverness, and defiance outpaces fact, transforming both Anne and Mary into larger-than-life figures whose influence transcends their physical captivity. Even mundane prison routines become arenas of subtle strategy. Meals are studied for hidden opportunities. Cleaning tasks are used to exchange whispered messages or hidden contraband. Nighttime offers moments to communicate, plan, and observe. Each small victory, a slightly loosened chain, a sympathetic guard, a successful feigned illness, strengthens their control over an environment designed to strip them entirely of power. Anne's outward defiance and Mary's calculated subtlety complement each other. Anne challenges authority directly, creating distractions and testing limits. Mary manipulates perception and fear, converting vulnerability into leverage. Together, their combined strategies make them unpredictable, resilient, and virtually untouchable within the confines of their cells. As time passes, their legacy grows. Even in obscurity, Anne's rumored escape and Mary's cunning survival in childbirth create a paradoxical immortality. One story ends with daring freedom, the other with tragic consequence. Yet both illustrate mastery over circumstance. The irony is thick. Those who sought to erase them inadvertently ensured their legend. Every act of rebellion, however minor, every manipulation of guard or circumstance, every whispered joke or feigned fainting spell, reinforces the idea that ingenuity and audacity are as formidable as chains or swords. Their experiences demonstrate that survival is not just about avoiding death. It's about preserving autonomy, intellect, and identity in a world that seeks to deny it. In the dim light of the dungeon, in the hush of whispered schemes, and in the subtle triumphs of perception and cunning, Anne and Mary define an alternative form of power, quiet, persistent, and profoundly human. As we near the end of their known stories, the echoes of their lives continue to reverberate, not just in history books, but in tavern tales, folklore, and the imagination. Their legacy, a blend of fact, rumor, and myth, reminds us that courage, intelligence, and audacity often leave the most lasting imprint, even when physical freedom is denied. Freedom, fate, and the enduring legend. Now, let's drift into the final ripples of Anne Bonny and Mary Read's story, the quiet, lingering aftermath that survives in whispers, rumors, and the occasional scholarly footnote. Because after the scaffold, the chains, and the calculated manipulation of captivity, what remains is a legacy that stretches far beyond the harbor of Port Royal, beyond the dungeons, beyond even the fading memory of their physical selves. Anne Bonny's fate, tantalizingly unclear, is a masterclass in the art of vanishing. Some say she bribed guards, slipped into Virginia, and reinvented herself under a new identity. Perhaps she ran a brothel, perhaps she lived quietly, perhaps she married, or perhaps she simply disappeared into obscurity, the ultimate reward for audacity. The idea is deliciously ironic. The woman who laughed at death, defied men, and mastered manipulation finds freedom not on a ship or in battle, but in anonymity. History may not know exactly what became of her, but that uncertainty is part of her legend. Freedom cloaked in shadow, as bold as any cutlass. Mary Read's story ends with a quieter, more tragic cadence. Pregnancy, her tool and shield, ultimately proves to be both protector and limitation. She survives the gallows only to face the perils of childbirth, leaving her infant in the care of nuns who could never imagine the mother who once slit a man's throat for stealing rum. Mary's cunning, her strategic use of circumstance, and her careful manipulation of perception could not outwit nature entirely, yet even in death, her legacy resonates. Her life illustrates that survival is not always literal, but can manifest in intellect, influence, and lasting myth. Together, these women embody a paradox: stripped naked, chained, and humiliated, yet eternally uncontainable. Anne's brazen audacity and Mary's quiet strategy transform captivity into theater, humiliation into leverage, and vulnerability into strength. The scaffold, the dungeon, the inspections, and the whispered schemes all become instruments not of defeat, but of legend-making. History remembers the audacious acts, the defiance, the subtle manipulations, and the brilliance required to thrive under extreme constraint. The city of Port Royal, for all its law, order, and moralistic pretense, becomes a secondary stage in this drama. Guards, midwives, and officials unwittingly participate in the performance. Every lapse in attention, every misjudged assumption, every act of human error contributes to the women's ability to maintain agency. Anne and Mary's lives demonstrate that power is not only wielded through force, but through observation, cunning, and audacity, even when every external indicator suggests helplessness. And the public naturally embellishes and amplifies. Tavern gossip, embellished tales, scratched and reissued wanted posters, and whispered legends ensure that the women's reputations outlast official records. Audacity becomes immortalized, cunning becomes folklore, and defiance becomes myth. In a world designed to erase them, they write themselves into collective memory, permanent despite chains, insults, and societal expectations. Even their small personal victories, loosened chains, sympathetic allies, whispered messages, feigned illness, are woven into history. These subtle acts demonstrate the quiet resilience and intelligence required to endure and shape circumstance. Anne and Mary may have been prisoners in body, but in mind, strategy, and spirit, they were untouchable. Their stories remind us that history often celebrates not the strongest, fastest, or most violent, but the cleverest, most resilient, and most audacious, those who can navigate constraint with wit and cunning. As time drifts on, we are left with images that linger. Anne laughing at guards, Mary whispering to midwives, both of them quietly rewriting the rules of captivity. Their legacy is paradoxical, ironic, and irresistible. Women stripped, humiliated, yet entirely in control of how the story is remembered. And perhaps that is the most remarkable feat of all. Surviving not just in body, but in imagination, myth, and the indelible record of audacity. So tonight, as we let the echoes of Port Royal fade into memory, we can picture two women, fierce, clever, and utterly unconquerable, walking silently through the corridors of history. They remind us that bravery comes in many forms. Intelligence is often invisible, and sometimes the most lasting victories are those claimed not with weapons, but with wit, courage, and the audacity to bend circumstance to one's will. And as we slowly drift toward sleep, imagine Anne Bonny and Mary Read somewhere beyond the reach of chains and laws, laughing quietly at the world that thought it could contain them. and somehow, in their absence, still cannot. In 1720, Port Royal and Bonny and Mary Read, two of the deadliest women on the Caribbean seas, were captured, chained, and humiliated by the Royal Navy. Stripped to their shifts, paraded before jeering crowds, and locked in rat-infested dungeons, they faced a system designed to erase them. But these women were not ordinary prisoners. Anne laughed in the face of punishment, spitting in guards' faces and enduring lashes with defiance. Mary, secretly pregnant, faked illness, manipulated her captors, and turned her vulnerability into a shield. Through clever manipulation, audacious humor, and small acts of rebellion, they survived captivity, outsmarted guards, and became legends. Anne vanished under a new identity, rumored to run a brothel in Virginia, while Mary died in childbirth, leaving a legacy of cunning, courage, and defiance that still echoes through history. This is a story of female pirates who refused to be tamed, a tale of survival, wit, and audacity that has inspired generations. If you've ever wondered how courage and cunning can defy the impossible, hit like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the world of forgotten history is full of audacious stories just like this. Dive deeper with us and discover the legends they never wanted you to know.